So I'm going to introduce Java by comparing it to Python. Here is a simple Python program that says, hello. Here's this corresponding program in Java. One thing that people immediately notice is there's just more characters in Java. And this is because Java was written with a different intention. Python was written in order to make programming sort of light, to be able to write programs fast. That's not the primary purpose of Java. Java is primarily intended to be a language for writing programs that live for a very long time, programs that we maintain. And so it has quite a lot of structure in it. So every Java program has a main function, and every function resides inside of a class. So in this case, the function is inside of the class hello. Every class is inside of a package. So there's quite a lot of structure there, sort of, stitching all this together. Java includes lots of stuff that we don't need to talk about right now, like visibility annotations and the keyword static. So for us, we're just going to always use the keyword static on any function. Both Java and Python will compile code before it's run. And you can see this in an IDE. So here I have that code written out. In this case, I'm in some Python IDE. I'm using PyCharm. And over here we have Eclipse, which we'll be using for Java. And in both cases, I think if we screw something up, you can see the compiler will complain. So here I have a malformed program, and the Python compiler says, I'm sorry, I don't know what you're talking about. You're not speaking Python to me. So the same thing can happen in Java. If you write the wrong sequence of characters, then you can end up with nonsense that the compiler can't make sense of. And so you end up with this red ink. So red ink is sometimes difficult to fix, but usually it's pretty easy. If you have red ink in your programs and you can't figure it out, just contact me. It's not usually super interesting what's going on. It's just a matter of knowing how to write it. And once we have a program like this, we can of course run it. So in Eclipse, I hit the play button here, and in PyCharm, I do the same. It's down here, and you can sort of see the output of the program. So in each case, what you see here is that there's a compilation step, which is determining whether or not your program is a well-formed program. And then there's the step of running it. And these are two separate things. If your program does not compile, you cannot run it. So like this just makes no sense in Python, and you're just going to get rubbish out. So in Java, we can import things. So there's an import statement. We'll be using this quite a lot. And the purpose of the import statement is to give us access to various things that aren't included by default. So here is a version of this program where I've imported standard lib. Standard lib is a package of code provided by the authors of our textbook, and they include this standard out object. So this is an object with functions that we can call to print. Okay, so excuse me, it's a class. Excuse me, it's a class with functions that we can call to print. So we have a standard out class that we can use. If you want to see the code for this, you can see it very easily by going to the Eclipse menu and navigate. You simply say open declaration, and it will take you to show you the code. Right, so there you can see what this code looks like. This is really not doing very much, but the authors of your book prefer it because they like to use these sort of functions of classes. So this is just a class and a function. There's no objects here that we need to worry about in order to run this code. If you don't include this import statement, you'll get an error. And what Eclipse is saying here, the compiler is saying, I'm sorry, I don't know what you're talking about because this is not actually built in. Here you can see Eclipse is giving some quick fixes, and actually some of them are useful. So what I'd like to do is actually import this class. So what Eclipse is going to do is to import it, and now everything is hunky-dory and it'll run just fine. So you can import a specific class from a package, or you can just say import everything from this package. It's not considered great style to import everything because it becomes difficult to know where things come from. But in this case, I'll be doing it just to make the program shorter. So most of our programs will begin by importing everything in the standard library, which is from the textbook. So in Java, it's also possible, instead of importing things, to use what's called a fully qualified name. So if you don't want to do the import statement, you can actually just type it here. And in fact, all the import statement is doing is saying where to find the definition of this name. In this case, this class. All right, so this is what's called a fully qualified name. It doesn't need an import because I've specified the package and the class that I'm talking about. So this is fully qualified names. For the most part, we'll be using imports, but you may see a fully qualified name here or there. These languages support variables. So, you know, in Python, I can write a program like this that will say hello to a particular individual. So there I have a variable called name. And of course I can do the same thing in Java. So we can just paste that over there. Paste that over there. Here we go. And there's the variable. Here what you've got is a single statement that both initializes and declares a variable. This is possible. So in fact, it's probably more normal in Java to write it this way, which is that you can actually say string name is Bob. If you do initialize a variable this way, as of Java 9, you can just write var here, and Java will figure out that you mean it's a string. So that's just fine. Python allows a single variable to have different types. So, and Java does not. So this is different between the two languages. So in particular here, if I choose to, after printing this out, let's say I want to set name to be 1. In Java, I'm going to get an error here. And the error will tell me that, I'm sorry, I'm expecting a string, and you're giving me an int. And I cannot convert an int into a string. So it's saying if you want to do that, then you need to explicitly do it. However, in Python, there's no problem here. So there's no notion in Python that a variable has a type. So values have types in Python, but not variables. So you can assign a variable anything. As a result of this, Java can do different things. It can catch more errors. So if you try to run code here, which tries to subtract 1 from the string Bob, what happens in Python? You might say, well, God, that's a nonsense program. But Python is perfectly happy to run such a program. What happens when you run it? Well, when you run it, you get an exception. And it says, I'm sorry, this makes no sense because you're trying to subtract 1 from Bob. In Java, you can get that error earlier because if I try to subtract, print out Bob minus 1, there you go. It's going to give me an error here, which says, I'm sorry, the subtraction sign is undefined for the argument. The important difference here is I don't have to run the program in order to see that. I just have to type it in. Whereas in Python, there's no red ink here. It looks just fine. For those of you that are interested, Java can be used in a very dynamic way. It has very abstract types and the ability to cast. So this is a little bit beyond the scope of what I want to talk about here. But for those of you that are interested, you might check this out. The syntax of the language is, of course, different, but people make too much of this sometimes. They're like, oh, Java syntax is so confusing. It's not really substantively different from Python. So Python uses new lines to terminate statements, whereas Java uses semicolons. So not a huge difference there. The other thing is that, in Python you use the colon and indentation to denote a group of code. In Java we do this with curly braces. So what this means is that in Java you can do things. Line breaks, what we call white space, is irrelevant in Java. So if you have something like this, you can sort of put it all on one line, and this is no problem in Java. The corresponding Python ends up with just rubbish, right? So this makes no sense in Python. So if I try to do a similar thing here, I end up with a malformed program, right? So you need the line break here. So line breaks are significant in Python. They're not significant in Java. But really, the languages do have the same conventions. And it's quite normal in Java to indent your code. So this is usually not considered great code. And if you have code that gets sort of messed up, you can clean it up. So Java has formatting conventions, and they are there in Eclipse. So if you go to the source menu and select format, it'll format the code for you. If you only want to format one thing, instead of selecting format, you can select format element. So I will format the current element. Okay. These languages both have functions, and the way we declare functions is not dramatically different. There's more ink in Java, mind you, but it's not crazily different. So here's a function in Python. Note that we have a variable for the parameter here, and similarly I'm going to derive a function here with a variable for a parameter. Note that in Java we have to say what type of parameter we're expecting, whereas of course in Python we don't, because variables don't have types in Python. So we also need to specify the return type in Java. So what is the result of this function going to give you? As a result of this extra type information, Java can find errors that won't be found in Python. So for example, here's a small variant of this program, and this is the kind of error that might occur in Python, where I type this in, and you're like, well, that looks fine. Everything looks okay, and then you go to run it, and you get none, none. So what is this supposed to do? Okay, so we're adding hello to the variable. So we're returning the string with hello plus the variable. And so what I'm going to do is then print out hello Bob, then print out hello Alice. So why do I get none, none? Who knows? Jeez. If I do the same thing in Java, I get an error. I don't necessarily get the best error, mind you, but I will get an error. So what is it saying? It's actually saying something rather inscrutable. It says the left-hand side of an assignment must be a variable. If you want to see this a little more closely, you can save the file and then look at the problems section, and it'll show you the problems. So what does it want me to do? Well, it's not super helpful what it's saying. It wants you to actually declare a variable here and store this result. But in fact, what's missing here is simply the return statement. So if I include this, then my problems go away. All right, and I can run the code again. Hello, Bob. Hello, Alice. Yay. We're going to be doing a lot of work with arrays and or lists. So the list structure in Python is really important. This is how you represent a sequence of data. So here's some very, very simple code in Python to my main program here is going to declare a list with 3 values, and then I'm going to call a function on that list to print it out. Okay, so what does the function do? It takes the list, here I'll call it A, and then for each element of A, it's going to print out that element. The corresponding code in Java, again, it's just a little heavier, but this is what it looks like. So I have a list variable, and this is a list literal, or an array literal. In Java, we call these arrays. This is a fixed length sequence of elements, and its type is integer, so I'm holding integer values. And what I'm going to do here is take the list and pass it to the function myPrint, which will take it as a. And now for each element x, I'm going to print out x. So almost identical once you get over the syntactic differences. In Python, we can also go through lists in a different way. We can actually look at each index of the list. This is slightly less idiomatic in Python, but it's very important in Java, so I want to make sure you understand this. So here I'm having the variable I go from 0 up to 1 minus the length of the list. So I here will be bound to 3 different values. First 0, then 1, then 2. And what I'm going to print here is the index and the value at that index. So if you run this in Python, it'll work. So let's just type that in. And you can see it running. Yeah, so 0 is 11, 1 is 21, and 2 is 31. The corresponding Java code looks like this. We say we're going to use an index variable I, and rather than having it go through this range, the notion in Java is to give the initial value, which is 0, and then to say how we're going to go through the range, in this case by incrementing. So this is sort of conventional here to say increment by 1. And when we're going to stop is when we surpass the length. So the syntax is a little bit funny. So instead of saying when to stop, we say when we shall continue. So we'll take I starting at 0. As long as I is less than the length, we'll execute this and then increment. So we'll have first I will be 0. And so this is going to print out 0 and 11. Then we'll increment I. And then we have I at that point will be 1. We print out 1 and 21. Then we're going to increment I again. It's still less than the length, so the I will be now at value 2. The length is 3. So because this is okay, we'll now print out 2 and 31. Now we increment I for the final time, and at this point the value of I will be 3. At that point 3 is not properly less than 3, and the loop will terminate. Right, so this is a for loop in Java. In Python, there's lots of different ways to capture this idea, and here's one way of doing it, where in Python I will use, instead of the range and length functions, I can use enumerate. So this will bind to the index and to the value as you go. But in Java, this is the sort of more conventional way. What you can do if you want to refer to the element by a different name is simply use a variable here to bind that value. We're going to be dealing with arrays in our first homework, and there's some things around arrays that are slightly unpleasant. In particular, printing arrays, it doesn't necessarily do what you think it should. So let's just look at this code here in Eclipse. So if I run this code, what are you expecting to be printed out here on line 7? Well, you'd expect the array to be printed out. Sadly, that's not what you get. What you get is some nonsense like this. So what this is telling you is that this is an array of integers, and this is its hash code, something we'll talk about later in the quarter. So that's clearly not what we wanted. So to get the array to print in a way that's more friendly to us, use the auxiliary function called arrays.toString. So, and that will give us a string representation of the array, which we can then print out. So this is a utility function of the arrays class, which is built into Java. You can see here I'm going to import it, and then I can use that class. So I put in a link here to the documentation for this class, so you can see just what Java documentation looks like. These utility classes are often quite large. As you can see, there's a lot of methods here. You're like, oh, lordy, that's a lot of methods. They're alphabetical. So when we get here eventually to the T's, there we go, toString, and you can see it will take a array and turn it into a string. So Java does this for each base type and then also for objects. So this is why there's so many different methods with the same name, because in Java the importance of a methods, it's not just indicated by its name, but its name and its type. So these are considered all separate methods here. In any case, so that's some useful functions. And I just want to talk about one more thing before we leave, which is how to format output, which is also quite handy to be able to do, and you'll see it in my homework, and I don't want you to be confused. Java also has a formatting class, which, and if you want to see the documentation here, it's actually quite complex. It does a lot of stuff, and it's very, very flexible. So if you want to actually understand how to do formatting, you can read that. But for now, you don't need to understand very much, except to know that this formatting class is usually called indirectly. So it's usually called by either standard.format or string.format or similar methods. And so here's some code where I will have a double, that's a floating point number. I'll have an integer number, and an array. And then to print those three things out, we can use a format statement. So this will print out the double as a floating point number, the integer as a decimal number, and the list as a string. All right? So again, if we run this, you can see the output. It's printed on two lines here because I used the \n to indicate that I want a line separator. \n is synonymous with %n, so this puts a line separator at the end. So note that if you don't put a line separator, it won't put one in for you. So you usually end these things with either %n or \n. So there's a lot of stuff about formats, but like I said, most of it's not really important for us. I want you just to be able to read and modify the formats that you'll see in the homework code.